So, a little background information before I get into this. I had a stepdad that really liked to make me scared, and at a young age, would have me playing with Ouija boards with him, and I'd be terrified. Growing up through the years, he would continue with the ghost stuff and ask me if I could see or hear the little boy. Pretty sure he was just crazy. Anyways, something ended up happening to me that I cannot explain. My mom eventually divorced him after years of abuse of us, drugs, and alcohol. I was 18 years old and we moved out on our own with my mom after 15 years of being with this person. The house was pretty old and in a rough neighbourhood. There were places in the house where the electrical was messed up and the doors were messed up and rooms where if something was fixed, it would soon break again. But that was all we could do at the time. My mum was single and working two jobs. My brother and I were still in high school trying to get through it. Life definitely got a little crazy. But anyways, things were written on the walls, even like, "This house is haunted." And literally a pentagram on the wall in the bedroom I was sleeping in. Like I said, it was the best we could do at the time. Within the first week of moving in, I was very sick. I couldn't lift my head. I was so dizzy, and we couldn't find out what was wrong. We even looked for a gas leak. I felt so strange being in that house, and I'm still not convinced that going through all of that stuff with my stepdad when I was young didn't mess me up in a lot of different ways. I was always terrified of the dark and had nightmares and things. Stuff continued to get weirder. I eventually started to feel better, but when I would shower, there was a closet that I always felt like someone was sitting in there watching me. I would come home and my closet door would be open. I even put things up against it, and I'd come home and the stuff would be moved and the door opened again. Once I was doing the dishes, and a glass cake pan flew off the wall across the kitchen. The only place in the house that I actually felt okay was the living room for whatever reason. The last thing that happened is what really had me confused. One night, my boyfriend at the time was dropping me off at home, and the driveway was on the side of the house, and the side my bedroom was on. My curtains in my room were see-through. I decided for whatever reason that night to look up. When I looked up, I saw a perfectly round circle of black mass in my window. I asked my boyfriend at the time if he saw it too, and you could tell he didn't want to freak me out, but he was kind of like, "Yeah, I do." I had him walk me up to my room and I was so scared, and it wasn't there anymore, and I never saw it again. There were some nights that I would feel like my feet were being pulled as well. We also had two cats and a dog. One of my cats disappeared, and we never saw him again. But my dog didn't really like it either, and would hide at my feet. We didn't live there much longer after that happened, but that's the scariest thing that has happened to me to this day so far. First of all, I live about a half an hour away from a small town, and a few hours away from a city. Also, I live on a pretty secluded road, and I know my few neighbours as their distant cousins. My closest neighbour I know fairly well. I doubt they'd be the ones knocking, as they have good lives on their own. Anyways, for the past week or more, I've been hearing knocking on my window specifically. It's always after the sun goes down. Just a few minutes ago, I heard it again, which is why I'm making this post. My bedroom is on the bottom floor, and my house is surrounded by forest, and I doubt it's an animal. If it was, they would have to be pretty persistent and rather large. My window is fairly high up. I'm almost 5'2", and all I have to do is reach my hand up to touch the bottom part of the window. To describe the knocks, they're fast. They're not hard at all. It's also not very gentle either. It's just enough to let me know that whatever is on the other side is there. I don't ever open my curtain because what's the point? Ignorance is bliss. Also, I just don't want to know what's there. One of these days, maybe I'll gather the courage to look, but I doubt it. Also, the knocks never come in threes. I say this specifically because I think some people say 3 knocks are like ghosts or some devil shit, and I'm just clarifying that it isn't 3. I'd say 4 or 5. but 4 sounds too short. The knocks are longer than that. Yes, they're quick, but when I try to recreate it, 5 sounds more fitting. And never mind, it just happened again. Slow, and in 3. Not disturbingly slow, but slower. I honestly don't know what to make of this. I was 16. My father was on a business trip, so my mom let me hang in their bedroom and kick back on their waterbed and watch TV, while she and my sister watched TV in the living room. I had a bowl of popcorn and was watching a program, happily munching away. Suddenly, I felt and was like all sound was removed from the room. It's hard to explain well, but it was as if a vacuum sucked out every existing sound at that moment. The television, the underlying hum of the furnace, and the way the air flows over your ears. And then, in my right ear, I heard these words spoken. "Excuse me, Kim." Now, I cannot tell you if the sound of the voice was that of a male or female. I just can't. The voice was clear and strong, but that's it. I froze in place. My heart began to pound, and I remember clutching my bowl of popcorn. Again, the same voice, same sound, and same words in my ear. "Excuse me, Kim." Somehow I gained a severe blast of adrenaline and shot up from the waterbed and leaped across it. My foot jammed down between the water mattress and the wood frame and nearly snapped my leg in 2 at the shin. The bowl of popcorn flew out of my hand, and the memory of the metal bowl and popcorn kernels flying all over the room is still very clear in my mind, and it all seemed to happen in slow motion. I flew out of the bedroom and raced out to my mother and sister, crying hysterically. Now, this is one of the few incidents that happened in that particular house. In the 1970s, I lived in what I believed to be a haunted house. It was widely known in the town our family had just moved into to be haunted. In fact, the person or people that had been living in it before us supposedly moved out because she was having problems with frightening incidents in the home. Of course, our parents didn't tell me or my little sister this information as they believed we were young and impressionable. They didn't want to scare us, nor did they want us to blow things out of proportion. They didn't have to tell us, especially not me. I figured it out rather quickly on my own. My first experience that I could not explain happened on a bright weekday afternoon. My sister and I were latchkey kids as our parents both worked. At this time, my sister was 6 years old and I was 11. We rode the school bus home and went inside to have a snack and do our chores. Once done, my sister went to the neighbour girl's house to play, and I decided to take a shower. I was completely alone in the house. It was an old home built back in the early 1900s. I recently saw an image of the house that was taken in 1901, so I'm not quite sure of the exact age. It was large and 3 stories high. Upstairs held the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Above, through a door in the ceiling in the bathroom, an attic. I climbed into the shower and began washing off the dust and grime from a long day of school. I was lost in thought and scrubbed my hair. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the bathroom door. Knock, knock, knock. Startled, I said, "What? I'm in the shower." I was annoyed because I was pretty sure that it must be my little sister having come in from outside to use the bathroom. There was no answer. What the heck? I ignored the issue and continued my hair washing. After a minute or so, and just as I began to rinse, knock, 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 another loud knocking on the door. I jumped. My eyes were full of soap bubbles and I was now irritated. "Nicole," I yelled. "What the heck do you want? I'm in the shower." I strained to hear my sister through the bathroom door, but there was no answer and no sound. It felt to me, though, like someone was listening. "Quit screwing around," I shouted. I quickly rinsed off and left the shower running, very carefully stepping outside the curtain, making sure not to alert anyone who might be listening. I wrapped a towel around me and waited to catch whoever was out there. I stood right at the door, my hand poised to grab the knob. I stood there for some time, and as you might guess, nothing happened. Grr, I mumbled to myself and climbed back into the shower. The very second the water hit my face, there was the knock at the door. This time, the knocks were clearly deliberate. How did whomever know I had climbed back into the shower? This was weird now, and I knew it. I turned the water off and yelled, "Who is it?" The second the last word tumbled out of my mouth, knock, knock, knock. In one motion, I pulled the curtain around me and leaned out of the tub, gripped the doorknob, and yanked the door open. There was no one there. No giggling sister who was not really interested in playing elaborate pranks. She was only 6 after all. I threw on my robe, ran into my parents' room and looked around. Then my bedroom and my sister's next. No one was upstairs with me. I would have heard and seen anyone on the stairs. They were old and they creaked terribly. I was suddenly scared. Something had been knocking on the door. Whatever it was, it wanted my attention. I quickly made my way downstairs, and as I passed the window on the landing, I saw my sister and a little friend playing Barbies on the porch outdoors. It hadn't been my sister. This, as I said, was the first experience I had in that house. There were several others in that house, one of which could have killed my sister. When I was younger, my parents and I lived with my mother's parents. Both grandparents are alive and healthy, with my mom's 2 older sisters, so you can imagine the house was always busy. We've always lived as a multi-generational family, as it's custom in our culture. When I was much younger, we lived in a very lively 4-bedroom, 2-story home. My 2 aunts were in their 20s and had tons of friends. My parents had me young, so they were in the same boat, and my grandparents were typical. Dad worked and Mom stayed home, so you can imagine the way our house was. People were constantly coming and going, phones were always ringing, and someone was always home. We had this custom where we kept our family phone in the main living room, on the same wall that held the stairs to the upstairs bedroom. It was right next to the kitchen, visible from both living areas, and just right off from the garage, so it was easily accessible no matter where you were in the house. If someone called for another person and they were upstairs, we would bang on the staircase wall so the whole house could hear someone make a phone call. It was a normal occurrence for us to be banging on the wall since everyone was so young and constantly receiving phone calls. Well, fast forward a couple of years. My grandpa passed away when I was 9. It was really hard because he was my favourite person and he took care of the family. My grandma was stay-at-home her entire life, so she wasn't prepared well enough to take over finances, bills, or just life itself without my grandpa. Unfortunately, she ended up losing the home due to some bad financial decisions and had to move in with my aunt across town. It was unfortunate, but at least my grandma had a place to go. She packed up her sentimental belongings and sold the rest and moved in with my aunt, who was thankful for this, as she had just had a baby and needed the help. My grandma stayed with this aunt in San Diego for years and helped her raise her second baby before my aunt's husband got orders from the military that he was being stationed in Japan. For a while, it was difficult trying to find a place for my grandma to stay, as extended family isn't allowed on base in Japan, only immediate family, especially because my grandma was now in her mid-70s. My other aunt didn't have the space, and another aunt unfortunately had drug issues and couldn't hold down a permanent residence longer than a month. We all agreed that her only option was to move to Las Vegas, where my mom had the space and the income to take care of my grandma. Grandma wasn't too happy, as she'd never lived anywhere except San Diego. She really didn't have a choice. A few months go by, and we're now ready to move my grandma, so that my aunt can pack up her place and sell it and get out of town. My family and I made the trip down to San Diego to get my grandma and move her and say our goodbyes to my auntie. At this point, my grandma was fully moved into my mom's home, where she was sleeping upstairs in one of my brother's rooms for the time being, as she waited for my bedroom to become available. My husband and I just started dating, and we decided to move in together for fun, since this gave me an excuse to be nice and spend more time with him. My grandma had been in Las Vegas for about 4 days now, and still getting adjusted, but she enjoyed it, because her casino was now a 10-minute drive. One night, my husband and I had just come back home to my parents' home at 2 a.m. after going out. We stopped to get some food and ate it in my mom's kitchen. We're talking and laughing in a whisper tone because my mom's house was tile and it was 2 a.m., so we didn't want to wake anyone up. A few minutes go by and I hear loud banging coming from the kitchen wall, so I figured, okay, my brothers must be awake in my room because they always played video games on my computer. Went into my room and the lights were off. The room was still and nothing was happening. We shrugged it off and considered that maybe it came from upstairs where my parents' bedroom was. And maybe they dropped something or it came from my brother's room and they were playing rough as they always did. A couple of minutes go by and the banging starts again. This time we were certain it came from the kitchen wall. I looked at my husband and told him to quit messing with me and making so much noise. I told him he's kicking the floor or something. He stood up and yelled, "I'm not doing anything." Banging started up again. It was 3 loud bangs on the kitchen wall. Freaked out, I looked at him and said, "Okay, if it's not you, it has to be something from upstairs." He and I went upstairs, turned on some of the lights, and saw the loft was empty. We checked my parents' room. They were both sleeping and snoring. I checked my brother's/grandma's room in fear. She fell and needed us, but her lights were off and she was sleeping too. Then I got mad and was so sure it was my brothers. I went to their room and saw the lights off. They were notorious for fake sleeping, so I went in and tried to shake them awake and even lightly poked their tummy because they're ticklish, so they definitely would have woken up. But no, they were out cold too. My husband and I are freaking out at this point and decided to go back downstairs and finish what's left of our food and go to bed. We got back to the kitchen and the banging happened again in 3 quick but loud bangs. We had enough, so we threw our food in the trash, left, and went to his parents for the night. On the way there, I openly joked about how my grandpa must have followed my grandma here and told us to go to bed. But now several years later, I'm certain he was there and was checking on my grandma to make sure she's comfortable and saw us up way too late at night. It must have been his only way to get our attention, just like how he did when he was alive. A few months ago, I started seeing this thing in my living room. It was the shape of a really tall person but lacked any distinguishing shape, sort of like looking through clear contact. I'd see it in the same few spots in my lounge room, but its preferred hangout was in front of the fridge, or in this one spot near my front door. I stopped seeing whatever this thing was about a month ago, but that's not to say that things have been normal. Last month, I was woken up at 12:52 a.m. by an alarm going off in my lounge room. Annoying as fuck considering I'm disabled, so couldn't get out of bed to investigate. Thankfully, I keep earplugs with me at night in case my cat wants to be a meowy little turd and wake me up. The alarm kept going off every night at 12:52 a.m. until the source of the beeping was discovered. My digital alarm clock had been set to that time, but it wasn't me that did it. I don't even know how to, and I hadn't touched it since daylight savings, which was months ago. But that's not the weird part. That afternoon, I got a message on Facebook regarding a friend I've known since high school. He died that night at 12:52 a.m. from cancer at the age of 33. What happened today? My disability limits a lot of the things I can do. I can't drive and rely on a power wheelchair to get around town. I go downtown a few days a week to do groceries, socialize, and add to my ever-growing list of art supplies. I was about halfway to downtown when a friend who I'll call Beck faced me. We hadn't chatted for a while, so her call was a surprise. We chatted for a bit before I saw this guy walking towards me. I should also mention that I have poor self-esteem and bad social anxiety, so what I did was mostly out of bravery, stirred on by having an audience to show off to. I'm 31, and he looked to be in his mid-20s. The man was the most attractive being I think I've ever laid eyes on. I'm talking about a Ryan Reynolds, Zac Efron, and Taylor Lautner in one person. He had what looked like a phone in his hand, and was wearing jeans and a casual shirt. He was walking in my direction, and as our paths were about to cross, I blurted out, "What's cooking, good looking?" He looked up, in what looked like genuine surprise, and mumbled something I didn't catch. Beck asked who I was talking to, so I held up my phone so she could see him as he went past. But there was nobody there when we looked on the screen, or anywhere. I turned my chair around in case he'd stopped, but the whole footpath was empty, and there was nowhere for him to go. Just an empty footpath and the side of a building that has no doors. I recently wrote about a maybe haunted house I lived in when I was a kid and the strange encounters that have occurred when we lived there. But recent events and recovery of some repressed memories of things that occurred in the house has gotten me thinking about a few other things that I overlooked before now. Some of the memories that have resurfaced recently didn't happen in the house that was supposedly haunted, but in an old farmhouse a few hours' drive away that my dad purchased for visitation purposes after my parents' separation. Some of the memories I've gotten back are like tiny sections added to the memories I already had, completing the memory but altering the scene entirely. Thus, the reason for my retelling of these events. Me and my siblings moved around a lot with our mum growing up, due to my parents separating and the bitter non-divorce and custody dispute between me and my two siblings. When I was 2 and mum was still pregnant with my sister, we moved into a small town with a population of about 800. The weird things that happened in that house we lived at with our mom only started after our dad purchased an old farmhouse a few hours' drive away from where we were living at the time. We lived with our mom, but would spend the occasional weekend with dad at his house on the farm. My dad owned that house from when I was 3 until 9, but I was maybe 5 or 6 when the events of this story took place. The farm was high up in the mountains, extremely isolated and aptly named Mount Hopeless. The 20 minutes drive from the closest town took us on a swervy dirt road, driving through thick vegetation and massive gum trees as far as the eye could see, with the occasional clearing that looked out to valleys, kangaroos and more bush. And to top off the already spooky vibe of the area, we'd pass Crazy Mary's house to get to Dad's farm. She was a hermit that lived in a run-down house in the mountains who mostly kept to herself, although the locals at the time knew to stay away from her. Picture Eleanor Abernathy throwing cats at you. That's what she looked like. Ratty black hair that hadn't met a comb in years. Clothes that looked like they were close to calcification and dirt adorning her face. She had some feral cats she fed and lived on her own. But we didn't have much to do with her, except for the time when our car stalled outside her house on the bend in the road. But we got out before she had a chance to throw a cat at us. The farm was near the end of the road, with a gate at the end of the road that belonged to the neighbour in the next property. It was on a long dirt road in a clearing, a fence running the length of the clearing on the left, with the view of Dad's house as we entered the clearing. I remember there was a really old and run-down house on the right, complete with a water tank rusted to shreds by age and abandonment. There was no fence visible from what I can recall, but I do remember how unsettled it made me feel. A spooky cabin in the woods vibe. The whole area did, if I'm being completely honest. At the end of the road was the gate that led to the house, and when I say it was an old house, I mean it was old. It was on 100 acres of farmland and very well off from the rest of the world. It had a front veranda that spanned the length of the house, with two large windows on either side of the front door, and a big brick chimney sprouting out of the side of the house. At the back of the house were stairs that led up to the back veranda and an outhouse on the left as you reached the top, which I hated going into. Picture sitting on a frozen wood slab at the top of a poo pit with spiders everywhere. As you go inside the house, you see a large wood table in the kitchen to your right, an open sunroom of sorts on your left, with bunk beds that we slept in when we visited. Along the far right was the biggest wood stove fireplace I've ever seen, with a chimney big enough for Santa's yearly visits. Down the short hall between the kitchen and sunroom were two rooms, my dad's room on the right and the spare room on the left. I can't recall why I didn't sleep in the spare room, but come to think of it, I don't remember much about that room. The only memory I have in there is opening a cupboard and there was a live bat inside. The boogeyman. I was about 4 or 5 when I first started seeing what I referred to as the boogeyman. I took my afternoon nap in Dad's room because it was away from the kitchen and quiet. One day, during my nap, I was woken by the feeling of being watched. It only felt like seconds since I'd fallen asleep before I was woken by this feeling. Opening my eyes in the fog of sleep, I saw what looked like my brother standing at the door with what looked like a sheet over his head. I told him to go away, but my demand got no response. He just stood there staring at me. My complaints to my parents fell on deaf ears though, as they'd always tell me he was out on the farm. I always chalked this up to my brother being a turd and trying to scare me, the never-ending sibling torment that's in the job description of being a sibling. That's what I thought, until the rest of that memory came to light. One day during my nap, I was woken to the familiar feeling of being gaped at. By this point, I'd had enough. I stomped out of bed as fast as I could and ran for where my brother was standing. Only, he wasn't there anymore. I looked down the hall and there was nobody there. The front door was closed and the house felt empty. Not the way it felt seconds prior. It's like he just vanished. I abandoned my nap to head outside in search of where my brother went. But what I saw when I went outside stopped me in my tracks. My brother was up near the chook pen, nowhere near the house. If that wasn't him, then who the hell did I see? The other part of the memory that has resurfaced is what this thing looked like. In my young mind, I always saw my brother with the sheet over his head. I guess that's what my mind created to make sense of what I saw. It looked like a person, but it was white and semi-transparent and had a feeling of aliveness to it. I don't know what it was or why it watched me sleep. Creaking floorboards. It's natural for an old house to creak and move with the wind, but the noises that came out of the house at night were unsettling, to say the least. During the night, I would hear noises like someone was walking on the floor, but at random intervals in areas of the house, almost simultaneously. An audible creak coming from the kitchen, followed by what sounded like a creak coming from the spare room, then back to the kitchen. But there was nobody there. My dad was snoring away happily in his room, and I could hear the top bunk springs creaking, so it wasn't my brother either. The things that happened in that house were tame in comparison to some of the weird things that happened at the house we lived at with Mum. But the timeline of events and recent memories have got me thinking. Could a spirit have followed us to the other house? I'm still not 100% sure what it was I saw. This happened about 25 years ago, so I could be remembering it wrong. Or maybe I created an imaginary friend. I'm a skeptic through and through, regardless of what I think I saw as a kid. So what's your take on this? An overactive imagination, or something more? I was in bed listening to music on my phone. I was basically the only person home, because my mum was buying groceries or something, and my little brother, who we'll call Alex, was at our cousin's place having fun. Before I get to the story, you have to know the layout of the place. Our bedroom has a wooden door to our balcony, and the balcony, our cousin's window, is close to it. So wherever he wanted to go to their place, we just used their window as a shortcut to go there instead of walking outside and getting to their front door. Like I said, I was on my phone listening to music with my headphones plugged in because I could practically hear my brothers and my cousins laughing and just being loud. I don't know when it started, but in the middle of my music, I could hear this beat, aka the knocks. I forgot to say that the wooden door has a lock that can only be opened inside the bedroom. So whenever Alex got locked in the balcony, he'd knock and call my name. Well, I didn't hear my name being called, so I thought it was just a weird beat in the music. But then minutes later, it was still there. Now I started doubting it was the music, because it didn't fit the rhythm at all. So I paused and listened, and it continued. The knock was unlike Alex's knock. His was more like an annoyed, loud knocking and yelling my name with irritation. This one was consistent. I don't know how to say it, but it was a weird kind of knock. Ever since from the start, it didn't change its pace and sounded basically the opposite of his. But I thought it was Alex, so I waited for him to call. Eventually I just got annoyed and got out of bed and opened the lock, which makes a loud clicking sound when opened, but the knock didn't stop. So I opened the door while saying, "What the heck, Alex? Is knocking all you know?" The moment I opened the door, the knocking stopped. At first I was confused because the knocking stopped the moment I opened the door. Our aunt looked through the window and said, "Alex is right here." And at first I thought they were pranking me, but even before our aunt denied it, I knew it wasn't true. Because first of all, yes, the window was close, but not that close that you'd get in there within a nanosecond. And the knocking was just so consistent, never changing. It was very unlike Alex's. Aunt's reply was, "Promise we didn't prank you. No one went to go knock at your door either." When I was 8 years old, my family, my father, my mother, and my sister were going through a difficult economic situation. Therefore, we lived in a rental house. It wasn't bad. The bad thing was that there was an abandoned house just opposite. There was the door, and if you went to a path to the right, it was the exit to the street. But to the left, you entered an alley between our house and an abandoned house in very bad condition. That house was literally falling. It was made of a rock-like material, but a little stronger. My sister and I went there to see what we found. But our parents always told us to be careful, since in the living room of that house, there was a big hole that was a noria. And from what we heard, the people who lived there left since their children had fallen there. We could never really check if it was true or not, but something strange happened in both houses. On one occasion, before it happened, I remember seeing a girl jumping in the middle of the living room of my house, while it was night and everyone was sleeping. I was unlucky that my bed was right in front of the door that led to the living room, and since we were not well enough economically, we turned off all the lights when sleeping. It was quite scary, and the only logical explanation I give is that with so much fear that I was maybe imagined. One night, I remember that I was asleep in bed or trying to sleep. I was in that position when your legs are hanging out of bed. So I feel something grab my foot and raise it. I move and it drops. I get angry. I see my sister at the door and immediately think it was her. I start to ask her why she did it and she says, "Do what?" My sister had a computer with a web camera. Just at that moment, she left on recording a video in that room. When we reviewed it, I could see how nobody took my leg. Simply, the leg rose alone. But I felt that someone took it. It's something to which today I cannot explain. My dad passed away in 2015. He was 64, so not super young, but it was a shock to us all because all four of my grandparents were still alive and well. And we obviously didn't expect for him to die before then. So my mom says that she felt like he's still around the house after he died. She would see shadows, hear footsteps, etc. I kind of chalked it off to her just being alone now in a house where they used to be together. In 2017, her father, my grandpa, died as well. Overall, she does believe in spirits and ghosts and used to be quite Christian. She's had paranormal experiences as an open-minded but realistic. Her first guess isn't always like, oh, ghost. She tries to figure it out logically before going to any paranormal conclusions, as to not freak herself out. In late 2018, when I was living with her, I had a boyfriend whose house I would stay at a few nights a week, as you do. She said that one night when I wasn't there, she woke up in the middle of the night because she felt something was watching her. She opened her eyes and recalled a large, shadowy face with not super defined features, but like a floating egghead with indents for eyes. Nobody. She flung herself out of bed, screaming, and threw a chair at it. It disappeared into thin air. She turned on the lights and waited, but eventually fell back asleep. The next night, she woke up again in the middle of the night, but this time to a glowing white orb above her head. She says it was the size of a pomelo. She again got scared and started screaming and kind of flailing her arms. The orb floated slowly out of the room. When I came home a couple of days later, she told me what happened. I immediately was freaked out and also confused. What are these two things doing? Battling? Dark versus light? And so we went to the shop and got crystals, etc. She said things subsided for a while, but one night she was getting ready for bed, and she said she felt a need to turn around while brushing her teeth, so that she was facing the bedroom. When she turned, she saw a blurry grey man run up and jump into the bed, like a dive into a pool, and disappear into it. She said it didn't feel very malicious, but she was spooked and still went to bed. The next day, she told me about the third experience and I freaked. I'm telling her to get a shaman in this house quickly, especially as I'm set to be moving out of her house and kind of far away. So now she's going to be alone. She's doing some work with this particular shaman before, so the shaman knows us and family a bit. She does some Reiki work as well as my mom, and gives her instructions on how to proceed and get the spirits out of the house. I do this ritual with her, and so far, she hasn't had any more spirits around her room at night. Something that the shaman said to her, though, has stuck with me ever since. My first guess when thinking about the entities coming to my mum at night is that it was my dad and then my grandpa. My dad and grandpa didn't really get along. My grandpa was very protective of my mum and never thought my dad was the best man for her. But then I'm thinking, why would my dad have a dark, shadowy face? It unfortunately makes sense, even though I would like it not to. He was a difficult man, and in his opinion, was going to finish his life too soon. He wasn't ready to go. Let's get back to the shaman. She practices some past life guided meditations, and in her Reiki work with my mom, told her that my dad was essentially stuck to her. Why? Because they had many past lives together. Apparently, in every past life before this one, he had outlived her. And the shaman said he had basically done anything to remain the survivor. So kill her, let her die, etc. The shaman said she saw it all there, and that he couldn't let go of my mum in this life because he was pissed that he went first. I honestly wish I could be like, nah, that's crazy. Dad wouldn't kill mom, hurt her, or haunt her. But the fucked up part is that I can totally see it. It makes sense to me. It hurts my heart to admit that, but I can see my dad being someone who puts himself before everyone else. He didn't think he deserved to die. He even admitted once to my mom, as she was taking care of him throughout his sickness, that if the tables were turned, he probably wouldn't have stuck around to take care of her. Me and my friend, both 17, were on holiday at a resort in Norwich, which was situated in a pretty large forest. I had been there once before, about 5 or so years ago, and on that trip I discovered a small dirt path that led into an uninhabited part of the woods. I was too scared to go very far down it when I first discovered it and sort of forgot about it. Fast forward to about 3 days ago, and me and my friend are bored and have like an hour to kill. It's about 9 at this point, and I decided it would be fun to go on an evening cycle in the woods. My friend is a very skeptical and logical person who isn't a fan of taking risks, so she needed some convincing, but eventually we went. The path took us deep into the forest, so far that we could no longer see any lights from the houses around us. It also bordered some kind of field. However, this field was blocked off by a tall metal fence that was topped with barbed wire. We decided to turn back after about 30 minutes of cycling because it was getting dark and we had no torches. When we returned, we were buzzing and decided we had to do that again, but next time explore more of the path. 2 days later, we decided it's a good time to explore more of the path. The sun is beginning to set, and it seems like the perfect time to set off. We begin cycling, however this time things feel different. My friend is getting quite antsy the further down the path we go, and even I begin to get a bit freaked out. Something feels wrong, but we decide to carry on. Eventually, we come to an unexplored area and come across some kind of wooden electricity box. We stare at it for a second. I try to see what's inside, but decide it's futile, and we carry on. As soon as we pass that box, the off feeling becomes much worse, and I came to a stop. I asked my friend if we should play some music from a well-known TV show that we both like, as the soundtrack would match the vibe of biking through unknown woods at night. She said yes, so I began trying to get the music up on my Spotify. I had no signal, but that shouldn't have been an issue, since I had the album downloaded, but it just wouldn't load. I was very absorbed in trying to get it to work, but after a minute, my friend said in a nervous voice, "Is that coming from your phone?" Confused, I go silent, and then I hear it too. I can very faintly hear a song playing. The song is one that recently blew up because it was used in a TV show, and not only that, but the part is playing in the chorus, which is not at the start of the song. Me and my friend both check our phones, but neither are playing anything. We both then book it back on our bikes. When we reach the edge of the woods, we both feel the bad vibes wash away instantly. When we get home, we both immediately checked any possible way the music came from our phones. We both asked our Siris to play the album, but they both said, "I need you to give me access to your Spotify," or something like that. We also checked multiple other things, but nothing gave us an answer. We were both thoroughly freaked out, especially my friend who's a skeptic and always disproved the many ghost stories and horror movies I'd tell her about. We went back to the path the next day, and even went back to the exact spot, and the vibes were completely gone, and we could find no trace that any other person had been there. My granddad died 25 years ago, when I was around 2.5 years old, so I've never really known him in person, just through stories that my parents and other families told me, and photographs of him I've seen. So this dream happened a couple of weeks back now, and it's really shaken me up. I dreamed I was at a garden party in the garden of the house my granny and granddad had owned when granddad was alive. I was sitting on a garden bench next to my mother, chatting, when I saw the garden gate open and people I didn't recognize were walking through, dressed in white. And then walking amongst them, I saw Grandpa, and he saw me and Mum and came over to us. I remember we hugged, and it felt like such a real hug. It still feels real thinking back on it now, how tight he held me and how warm he felt. He kissed my cheek and told me how proud he was of me and of how well I'd grown up. And then he told my mum what a beautiful young lady I had become. Then he said he was sorry he couldn't stay longer, but he was so happy to have seen me now all grown up, and that he's so proud of me and he loved me so much. I remember I told him I loved him too, and started sobbing as we hugged again. Then I sat back down on the garden bench next to Mum, and watched him as he disappeared into the crowd of people, wearing white. and headed back towards the gate. And then I woke up. I felt like I'd been crying when I woke up as well. I couldn't feel any tears on my face, but I was breathing really heavily and I felt shaky. This happened 6 months ago in a house I moved into with a roommate. She had lived there for a year prior, and once I moved in, we started rearranging the living room. I need to note that there were old bedroom sets in the basement from the original owners of the house: bed frames, dressers, and mirrors. Back to the living room. There was a mirror on the wall opposite the fireplace, with a mirror above the mantel. The mirror opposite the fireplace came from the basement and was hung up by the girl that lived there before I moved in. So I take the mirror off the wall as we're putting our TV in that spot and prop it up against the wall perpendicular to the wall it was hung, until we can figure out where to put it. This is when we started to notice the weird things happening and hadn't quite realised the mirror could be an issue. There's a cot in the basement and was set up apparently by the owner of the house. If he ever came to the town, well, the lights above the cot randomly stopped working, and that corner of the basement just started having an eerie vibe. I tell my roommate this, and we go down to investigate. What we found scared the shit out of us. Bare footprints on the cot, seemingly pacing back and forth from side to side. No one in their right mind would walk barefoot down there, as it's dirty and there's been rats. We measured our feet next to the prints, and while roughly the same length, they were way too wide to be either of ours. A couple of days later, I'm down in the basement doing laundry. I make my dog come down there with me because it's so creepy. He wouldn't stop staring at the corner containing the cot, and I felt I was being watched. A moment later, the lights above the washer and dryer started flickering, so I got the hell out of there. The same day, later in the afternoon, I'm standing in the living room on the phone with my brother, talking about work with my back to the mirror propped against the floor. My dog starts growling and aggressive barking. My initial thought was both mine and my roommate's dogs were behind me fighting over a toy. So I snapped at them to stop. And when I turned around, it was just my dog staring into the mirror, but not looking at his reflection. So that freaked me out, and it's when I started connecting the dots. I had a fish in a tank on one side of the mirror, and my roommate had a cool palm tree-like plant on the other side. My fish died suddenly, and the plant wasn't doing well, no matter her efforts. I have to note, I had been telling my roommate that the mirror seemed warped, because I felt I looked horrible and fat when I saw myself walking into the room. She apparently had also noticed this. So I bring up my mirror theory to her, and she immediately grabs the mirror and puts it in our detached garage in the backyard. We both felt better about this until the next day. I went out back to smoke and it was raining, so I opened the garage door for some shelter. A fluorescent bulb was on the floor in the middle of the garage, as though it had fallen, but it wasn't on a place it would have seemed to have landed and completely unbroken. It's like someone laid it there. I looked up, see the mirror facing me, and get the fuck out. I explained this to my roommate, and we immediately grabbed the mirror to walk it across the street to Goodwill. She's holding it by the wire it hung on for years, and the moment we reach the edge of the property, the wire snaps and the mirror falls to the ground without breaking. We get it across the street and leave it. The next day, the lights in the basement started working, and we had no other weird experiences. I grew up in a small town on the southern Oregon coast. There wasn't a whole lot for a teenager to do there, so we had to get creative. One of our favourite activities was to drive around and appreciate the raw, natural beauty of the area, and explore the many trails, vistas, beaches, and such. We would greatly enhance the experience by taking a threshold dose of Lucy. This, of course, is not smart, and could have gone terribly wrong. We were on a night voyage one time. There were 3 of us in my '91 Honda Accord. We found ourselves in Crescent City, California at around 3 a.m. The town appeared eerily vacant as we aimlessly cruised its streets. Coastal fog blanketed the silent city. Suddenly, a massive beam of light level with the ground passed over us. It kept happening, and each time I could hear and feel it smoothly ripping through the sky. Filled with excitement, we began driving toward the source, which of course was a lighthouse. We all got out and enjoyed watching the beam for a while. Then we noticed a pier stretching out over the water. We walked down and onto the wooden pier when we noticed that we were not alone. About halfway down the pier was a group of 4 or 5 small figures. We were a little surprised to see anyone out there. We were all feeling spooked, but unable to make the decision to turn around, we kept walking. "Just act normal," whispered one of my friends. We awkwardly walked past these figures. They were 4 feet tall at most, covered head to toe in a patchwork of brown fabric, complete with hoods, face covers, and gloves. They carried with them some kind of woven baskets. We were very spooked, and my heart was racing, but they seemed even more agitated by our presence. Making very odd click and squeak sounds to each other, they kind of scrambled around as we passed them. It also very odd we noticed that the pier was covered in sea life. There were fish flopping around here and there, many crabs skitting around, some of them finding their way over the edge and back into the water, and fresh clumps of seaweed. None of us looked back for a while. When we did, we saw they were leaving. We watched, dumbfounded, as they exited the pier and all piled into a Ford Taurus station wagon and drove away. Relieved that they were gone, we all stood at the end of a pier for quite a while discussing this weird situation, while the beam continued circling the sky. We had all witnessed the same thing. We were high, but not hallucinating. Did our enhanced state of awareness allow us to see them when they're normally cloaked to normal humans? And how did all the sea life get up onto the pier? This happened about a decade ago. I was about 18 at the time. I was dating a boy for about a month. We'll call him B. B was also completely dismissive of the idea that ghosts are real, even more dismissive than I was. He thought the idea of religion, spirits, aliens, etc. were all bizarre fantasies. About a month into our relationship, he decided it was time I met his parents. I, being a gothic teen, was extremely nervous, but I reluctantly agreed. He picked me up and drove us to his apartment to meet them. Upon walking through the front door, his mother sat on the couch with the 2 dogs to the left of me, and his father stood on the kitchen entryway to the right of me. He introduced me, and we made pleasant small talk. I was so focused on the conversation and my nerves that I hardly noticed the dogs barking until his mother yelled "quiet" to stop them. We chatted for about 20 minutes, then headed out for our weekend plans. About a week later, he invited me over again. His parents weren't home, and upon arriving, I noticed the only one dog was there. The dog was less timid this time, so I bent down to pet her. B told me her name and a bit of her history, how they adopted her, etc. I then asked him about the black dog, and he got a puzzled look on his face. "What black dog?" "The one that was here last time. It looks just like this one, only it's black." Belle was the only dog here. He looked at me in pure disbelief and told me they'd had a dog just like that, but it died a few months ago. I told him the dog had a white stripe down its chest and a blue collar with a bow on it, and his jaw hit the floor. He led me down the hallway and showed me a photo on the wall of the 2 dogs together, and my description perfectly matched it. A photo that could not be seen from the front door where I had stood during my entire last visit. We tried for a solid hour to make this make sense. I couldn't have gotten every single detail right, down to the collar. It wasn't something seen from the corner of my eye. I stared right at this dog for 20 solid minutes. It was hardly 5 feet away from me, coming up occasionally to sniff my shoes and barking, as any dog would do at a newcomer. I undoubtedly saw this dog. To this day, I can see the scene in my mind very clearly. I don't have any history of mental illness or hallucinations. I've never experienced anything like this. Yesterday morning, exactly 3:33 a.m., I was laying in bed with my boyfriend. Early that night in the car, we were having a discussion on whether we believed in ghosts and how they'd appear and whatnot. We both agreed we have a sense there is some kind of paranormal, but didn't go much deeper into it. We were hanging out in bed and we were getting ready to sleep when I heard the click of the bathroom door. I kept telling him I heard the knob click shut, and he kept telling me he remembers shutting it. The bathroom door is right across from my bedroom, so I was staring at it and the light was on inside, as I could see through the outline of the door. I remember using the bathroom, and I'm forgetful sometimes about closing the door and shutting the light off, so I can't really remember the state of the bathroom, but I knew I heard a click. He kept assuring me he shut it, and my cats were being loud, but they weren't by the bathroom. As I kept telling him about it, I looked away for a split second and heard another click, but it was a sound the light makes. I looked back and the light was now off, and I no longer saw the outline. I was scared as shit, so I grabbed my phone because I thought there possibly was an intruder. The time was exactly 3:33 a.m. I know it's silly, but it seemed so odd and the air felt so uncomfortable. I kept believing there might be someone in there somehow, thinking logically. After 5 minutes of panicking, we found items in the room to defend ourselves with. Turned on all the lights outside the bathroom, then opened the door to discover an empty bathroom. I've been living in this apartment since July, never witnessing anything off, other than feeling kind of scared when he doesn't stay the night with me and having nightmares. The person in which I took over the lease never mentioned anything spooky happening, but it is an older complex that was renovated. I've only ever woken up at 3:33 once while staying at a friend's house and feeling eerie because it's a spooky hour. Plus, I vividly remember having a weird dream that woke me up, but don't remember the details. Anyone else have weird occurrences at this hour? I feel crazy as hell. So I work in a hospital doing MRIs, and every day our patient list consists of inpatients and outpatients. The MRI room is located directly next to the CT room, along a corridor that also has rooms for fluoroscopy, DEXA scans, etc. The corridor is maybe 20 long, maybe a little longer. So CT has brought an elderly patient down, and all the staff along the corridor can see her, and everyone can see she's obviously not well. She's not screaming or in pain or anything, just very quiet with glazed eyes and not really moving. So I go about my business checking in on other patients and getting them checklisted, which takes about 5 to 7 minutes per person. As I'm walking back into the office, I see a crash team running towards me and heading towards the CT room and hear a commotion. I couldn't tell at the time exactly what was happening, but it turns out that the elderly patient had passed away on the table as they were positioning her and preparing her for a scan. Everyone in the scanning area is a little distressed, but gets on with their work. We eventually finish scanning our last outpatient, and I'm shutting down the department and getting everything ready for the next day. I'm going to get more gowns from along the corridor, and as I go to leave and walk past the CT room, I and another colleague hear the sound of the hospital bed wheels approaching our area. Apart from the three of us, the department is empty. Me and the other guys both turn around, and at the end of the corridor, we see a figure standing there but not moving. Now, I'm not really a superstitious person, but this really did get me and my colleagues. No one should be there apart from the three of us, but we can see each other and know where each other are. We went back to the MRI room and questioned what we saw. We all saw a figure. We all recognized the hair. We all saw something or someone standing still. We decided that it was best to leave the MRI room together, as we were all a little shaken. When we head back out, there's no one there, but the lights are off along the whole corridor, from the very top, past the imaging rooms, including CT, leading to our department. The three of us decide to leave our bags and other belongings in the lockers and head straight to security to ask if they'd seen anything, which they said they hadn't. They escort us back in. We grab our bits with lightning speed and hightail out of there. As I mentioned, I'm not a superstitious person and wouldn't say I believe in ghosts per se, but I have no other explanations to what I saw. Could it have just been my mind playing tricks on me after a long and stressful shift? I saw her literally minutes before she died. Could it have been her spirit lingering? I still work there and haven't seen anything else, but walking past CD gets my heart going and makes me feel physically sick.